Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 58 of the Principles of War podcast, Reflections on the Battle of Long Tan.
This is the Principles of War podcast, professional military education for junior officers and senior NCOs.
This is the last episode in our series of interviews with Lieutenant Colonel Harry Smith, the OC at the time of Delta Company at the Battle of Long Tan. We talk about the night after the battle. We talk about some of his reflections on how the battle was conducted. We look at the higher headquarters, so battalion headquarters and task force headquarters and their contribution to the battle. And we asked the big question that I know many people were really interested in. What did he think of the movie Danger Close? This is our last episode with Harry Smith. As you left the battlefield on the night, how did you feel the battle had gone, and how did CO 6RAR feel that the battle had gone on the night of the battle? Was there a realisation at that point that that the enemy casualties had been that high? Or?
I didn't want to leave the battlefield, but we were told to go, and some of us went back in APCs. The rest formed up in single file, hanging on to each other so that they wouldn't get lost. It was a dark night, and we got out and back to the grassy area without any problems, and waited there until dawn, and we had to give orders and reorganise ourselves before we could go back into the battlefield.
So at that point in the morning, when the brass were coming out to accompany you back into the battlefield, was it a feeling that it had been a significant defeat at that point?
No, I had no specific ideas of what casualties we've inflicted on them. My main concern was that the 15 missing weren't going to be mutilated, as we'd heard rumours from what the enemy did to prisoners up north, and that was my main concern, really. Hopefully I find those guys and recover them. That was the main thing in my mind the next morning, and I was very relieved to find that two were still alive and the others hadn't been mutilated. In fact, their bodies hadn't been touched. I, in fact, from memory, think that even their weapons had been taken, although somebody said to me that one of the Salars or something had been found somewhere else. They'd been taken away and dropped somewhere else. I don't know. I can't remember exactly. But in the main, they hadn't touched the enemy, hadn't touched our bodies, and had not touched their weapons.
Which shows just the level of disorganisation amongst them as they were withdrawing, I guess.
Yeah, well, you don't withdraw a regiment in a minute, and I would imagine that they had enough casualties of their own to carry out, as they always try to carry their own casualties away, so that the Allies don't know how many casualties they caused. And I would believe that they were flat out carrying their own without worrying about ours. During
the conduct of the battle, how did you deal with the stress of trying to understand what each of the platoons were doing, how to work with Maury Stanley in coordinating the artillery and trying to think ahead of where the battle was going to go, things about like resupply and reinforcements? How did you personally feel during that, and how did you deal with that combat stress?
It just happened. I did what I had to do, and I gave orders that I had to give. The platoons who were up front and actually dealing with the enemy on an eye-to-eye basis, they did an exceptionally good job. The two commanders directed the fire of their sections, and the section commanders directed the fire, and it all went like a textbook exercise, if I could say that. And I had very little stress in trying to sort things out. I had Maury Stanley was lying alongside me. He was getting fire directions from the platoons over the radio. Alternatively, I would say to Maury, there's enemy over there on the bottom of Meribat Hill. Let's have the artillery over there. And I remember saying to him, we need the whole regiment, and get me the rest of the guns, which was another 12 105s and 6 1555s. And of course, what happened was that no, you can't have them. With the verdict from the task force, the CIO said, leave the guns to the artillery. And I said, just give me every gun they've got. I want every gun you've got, and I want it now. And anyway, about a minute later, Maury Stanley alongside me said, "Hey, boss, we got the regiment." He then started to direct the regiment fire. He got a 24-gun firing, so that was good.
What do you think the key factors were in Long Tan being such a decisive victory for the Australian forces?
The enemy weren't quite sure of where we were. All their communication telephone lines, as they moved forward, they used to lay telephone lines. And all their telephone lines were cut by artillery shrapnel, so they had to send runners to give orders. In the main, my soldiers shot the runners. And they had trouble in command and coordination of their own forces. And the amount of artillery that fell on them, there was something like 3,000 plus rounds of artillery fell on the enemy. And, apart from killing a large number, it certainly didn't allow them to, get on with running a battle. We were the ones that were on top, and they were not in a very good position. And I guess the artillery, plus the round fired by my soldiers, which, as I said before, were 10,500 rounds, they all took a toll on the enemy, and we came out on top.
What were the key learnings that you took away from the battle as the company commander?
The true learnings.
What do you feel that you learnt from the battle?
I learnt that my soldiers were very gallant and brave and conducted themselves better than you could ever expect a company to conduct themselves against what we're up against, and we came out of it in front. I'm not sure what else I felt about it. It was a non-stop firefight for a number of hours, and there wasn't a lot to dream about at the time. And when it was all over, when we left to go back out of the rubber, we weren't quite sure what the enemy had done, where they'd gone, and we might be counterattacked. But anyway, we didn't know, as we now know, and I've actually talked to one of the enemy commanders when I was over in Vietnam 4 years ago. They had been knocked around so much, they had lost all concept of command, and all their telephone lines had been cut by shrapnel from the artillery, and they couldn't talk to each other, and that didn't put them in a very good stead at all. And they decided to withdraw, probably as best we can pin the time down at about 6:45, they decided to withdraw. They'd taken too many casualties. They had run out of time. They set themselves time for any particular engagement. They knew that reinforcements would be on the way, and they probably had been told by the battalion D445 in the south, about 800 metres to the south, that the APCs had arrived and were coming up toward the battlefield, and that made the enemy commander pull the plug and gave the orders to withdraw the regiment. They had actually left us, we didn't know that at the time, and were heading very fast to the east when the APCs arrived to the south of us, about 300 metres. They could see the enemy disappearing in the east. They turned right and chased them, and there was a firefight going on between them. But eventually the enemy disappeared in the rubber and the bush, and it got too dark to see anybody, so the APCs turned around and came back to us, and that was at 7:10.
Have you got any thoughts on how the CO and Brigadier Jackson conducted the battle? Is there anything they could have done, any improvements that they could have made, or things that they did well?
Well, they weren't involved. Despite what the Brigadier's citation for his DSA says, that he personally directed the battle, and his able personal direction played an important role in the defeat of the enemy. Brigadier Jackson gave me no orders, Colonel Townsend gave me no orders, and they weren't there. I had more trouble with the headquarters people in getting what I wanted, in other words, the reinforcements, the artillery, the ammunition, and so forth. I don't think either of the commanders realised the nature of the battle that we're involved with.
Why do you think that they struggled to understand that? Obviously, as the artillery fire increased, they would have understood that there was a significant contact in place. They would have been listening in on the artillery net as well. Why do you think they struggled to form a good picture of what was going on?
Well, Brigadier Jackson had a problem in that there was another regiment known to be to the north of the task force base, and I guess one of his problems and occupying his mind is what's going to happen if this other regiment comes down from the north. And that's the reason that he gave for delaying the reinforcements and leaving the task force base to come out to us. They were, the APCs sat at Alpha Company with the soldiers waiting to get on board. Why they didn't get on board the APCs, I'll never know, but they didn't. They sat there for over 45 minutes to an hour before the brigadier agreed to let them come out.
Which is a significant delay.
Oh, yeah. But he didn't want to let them know because it would have reduced the forces back in the task force base to a minimum if the enemy attacked from the north.
Yes, yeah. It was probably quite a dilemma for him. Where are you at now with the recognition for the soldiers? Do you think that that's finally been redressed, or is there still more work that needs to be done there?
50 years after the battle, in 2016, the Awards Tribunal held a meeting every year at Maroochydore in the Siebel Townhouse, and that was the last of several reviews. Of course, I kept on pushing for the original awards to be made good, whereas of the 18 or 20 recommendations I put up for my soldiers and others, for example, I put up a recommendation for Murray Stanley and Adrian Roberts to get the Military Cross. Well, Murray Stanley got an MBE, which is in fact higher than the Military Cross, from his own government, and Adrian Roberts only got an MIB until the review in 2016 when he was upgraded Medal of Gallantry, which is the current version of the Military Cross. We had a number of reviews. The first one, the review board did not interview any of the soldiers and didn't discuss the soldiers. All they came up with was an award for myself and my two platoon commanders and nobody else. I wouldn't accept that, and I pushed for more reviews, and eventually in 2016 the tribunal held a major review, and I was able to get awards for all those that had been put up in 1966, although they were not necessarily the same award. For example, the military medal no longer existed. It now became a Medal for Gallantry or similar, and the MIB was a commendation for gallantry, not mentioned in dispatches. But I believe, with the exception of a couple that weren't approved, I got all the others that I'd asked for, and I was quite happy with it. Phase, I'll recall what I can, but it's been a long time. It's since 1966. We're looking at 54 years down the track, and I'm exceptionally proud to have commanded Delta Company and to have won the Battle of Long Tan. But sad that I lost 17 of my soldiers killed, and there was another one from the APCs that was mortally wounded and died in hospital, I think, 9 days later. But the others who were wounded, there were 24 wounded, all of those survived, and I guess looking at figures, I guess we came out of it very well.
I know, having read the official histories, having spoken to a lot of people about it, reading some of the books, including your book, and in particular in talking with Dave Sabin, I think one of the most important factors is the leadership and the training that Delta had in that lead up. And so I think, the gallantry that the men displayed is a huge reflection on the way that on your training and your leadership. So thank you very much for the insights that you've provided today, because I think that for everyone who's serving, there'll be a lot of really valuable insights in the way that you prepared the soldiers for the battle.
Yes, well, as people will tell you, particularly quoted by Brian Wickens, the intelligence officer somewhere, that Harry Smith did things his own way, and that's what I did. I trained the company the way I wanted to train them, based on my experiences in Malaya, where I was a platoon commander and shot my first enemy. I wanted to see my soldiers go into action with the best possible background and weapon training and teamwork and esprit de corps that we could possibly have, and in retrospect, I believe we achieved that.
Absolutely. The results really speak for themselves. One quick last question. What were your thoughts on the movie Danger Close?
As people tell me, it's not a documentary, it's a movie. There are parts of the movie that I don't particularly like. It's not accurate in a lot of places, but generally speaking, everybody thinks it's a wonderful movie. Well, if that's the verdict of the public at large, well, I'll have to put up with that. But neither of my platoon commanders nor myself were involved in the production of that movie. It was all done by the producer without discussion with us, and we at no time were asked to become involved in editing whatever had been filmed or so forth. I can probably suggest that he didn't want Harry Smith and Dave Sabin and Jeff Kendall and Bob Burek, etc., all commenting on the movie because he'd never get a satisfactory agreement. So they did what they did, and everybody that I've spoken to reckons it's a pretty good movie.
I think it displays a battle in a moderately realistic way, and it's good that Australian filmmakers can depict battle scenes in that way. But from my point of view, it fundamentally missed what Long Tan was about and was inaccurate about some of the people who were involved in it.
Certainly, the firefighting scenes in that movie were very good. There's no doubt about that. I've got a DVD of it here, and every now and then I'll play it just to remind myself of what went on that day.
It didn't, I don't think it represented the mateship or the leadership, or Maury Stanley was portrayed fairly poorly. Maury
Stanley was portrayed very poorly, yes. I'm not happy with the actor that played Maury Stanley, bore a little resemblance to Maury Stanley, and he didn't get the accolades that he should in the movie.
And nor really did you, tragically.
Oh, I don't know.
Thank you very much, Harry, for your time. It's been really valuable, and I'm sure the listeners are going to get a huge amount out of it. And yeah, particularly for those in command positions, I think I'm sure we'll all get something out of it about the way that we prepare our troops, and just the way that we think about our training programs. Yeah, so thank you very much.
You're welcome. I simply like to say I trained Delta Company the way I saw they should be trained, not necessarily what the battalion wanted, and I had some arguments with the commanding officer from time to time, but I won out. We went to Vietnam as a pretty well-trained company, and when Long Tan came along, the soldiers certainly called on their experience and teamwork and courage, and did what they had to do and did it well.
Absolutely, and were brilliantly prepared and led. So, yes, thank you very much. So there you have it. I'm incredibly appreciative of the time that Harry has been able to give us, and also the way that he's been able to share his wisdom and the lessons that he's learned, the way that he's trained his troops ready for combat, and the way that he conducted the battle as the OC, as the leader of the company in contact at the Battle of Long Tan. I personally have gotten a lot out of it, and I think that there will be definitely some tweaks that I'll be putting into our training program so that we can look to ensure that our troops have that training, that esprit de corps, the knowledge, the skills, the fitness that they're going to need should they ever deploy. I've mentioned it before, if you're interested in the story of Long Tan or Harry's story, and it is a great story, definitely check out the Battle of Long Tan, the company commander's story. I'll include a link in the show notes. It is a really great read, very interesting, and includes a few more perspectives that we haven't talked about in the podcast.
The Principles of War podcast is brought to you by James Ealing. The show notes for the Principles of War podcast are available at www.theprinciplesofwar.com for maps, photos and other information that didn't make it into the podcast. Follow us on Facebook or tweet us at Surprise Podcast. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on iTunes and tag a mate in on one of our episodes. All opinions expressed by individuals are those of those individuals and not of any organisation.